Will Erik ten Hag be sacked by Manchester United this season? Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that that's a ridiculous question. After all, following the disastrous experiment in appointing Ralf Rangnick as interim manager, he not only returned United to the Champions League with a third-place finish, but was also able to win the club's first piece of silverware since 2017, with a win in the League Cup, as well as reaching the FA Cup final. His team last season achieved the highest points tally since Mourinho was sacked, and had arrived at Manchester after a hugely successful period at Ajax, which saw him return Ajax to the summit of the Eredivisie, winning 3 titles and 2 cups in just 5 years. He also reached the semi-finals of the Champions League. He had spent time working with Pep Guardiola at Bayern and was widely regarded as one of the most exciting managers in the business. He was clearly the man that the United board believed could turn around the decline in the league as well as deal with some of the internal issues that had contributed to its stagnation. He was given a healthy transfer budget and allowed to bring in the players he felt would make a difference. He spent €95 million on Antony, a player who'd been key to his success with Ajax and had become a starting player with the Brazil national team. €71 million on Casemiro, a player with 5 Champions League titles at Real Madrid. €58 million on Lisandro Martinez, an aggressive centre-back who'd been his defensive rock and player of the season at Ajax in his last season, as well as €15 million on Malacia, who was a young Dutch international left-back from Feyenoord, for a total transfer spend of €240 million. Further evidence of his backing by the Man United board was to be found in the players that he was allowed to move on. Pogba, Matic, Lingard, Cavani and Mata, and by the midway point in the season, Ronaldo, who, having criticised the club in a tell-all interview with Piers Morgan, had attacked the club's lack of ambition as well as investment in its facilities. Now, his results in that first season showed United clearly moving in the right direction. And before the start of the season, he was given a further €191 million to improve the squad. He brought in Onana in goal from Inter, fresh from the Champions League final, Mason Mount, who Chelsea were apparently desperate not to lose, and Rasmus Højlund, a young and exciting striker from Atalanta, for what could end up being €72 million. So it seemed fair to say that he has the backing of the board and the fans and is well into his project to take United back to the top. Is any discussion around his sacking then merely a knee-jerk reaction to the first 4 games of the season? Isn't it far too soon to be worrying about his long-term future? Well, no, not necessarily. I'm going to analyse his position against a set of criteria which are typically key contributors to a manager being sacked and establish how likely it is that the board could conclude he's not the man to lead them any further. Now, firstly, transfers. Has he signed well, and does he really have the backing of the board in the market? Now, having said that the board backed him in signing the players that he wanted, is this the whole story? Certainly it seemed that they moved heaven and earth to bring him who he wanted at the start of last season, but the summer window before the 23-24 may be more about who United were not able to sign. The decision to sign Højlund may prove to be a great one. He arrived with a back injury which has restricted his game time to a late cameo in a defeat against Arsenal in the last match before the international break, but he looked bright, physical and hungry, and certainly seemed to change the game. It was clear that despite improving the defence to its second best season since Mourinho left, the lack of goals was an issue in demand of attention. Indeed, only scoring 1 more goal than the season before, in which they finished 6th. The 3rd lowest tally in a decade since they last won the title, with the only recognised striker in the squad being Anthony Martial, a player who'd managed only 11 league goals in the last 3 seasons. And with last year's loan signing of Weghorst, a last-minute replacement for Ronaldo, who also failed to score, there could be no question that this is an area of the squad needed desperate improvement. So was Højlund the first choice? Before the start of the window, there'd been a great deal of speculation that United would make a bid for Napoli star striker Victor Osimhen, whose goals had taken Napoli to their first Serie A title since Maradona had left in '92. Now, it seems that Aurelio De Laurentiis, the chairman of the Italian champions, would only consider bids for a star player that were, to use his own words, indecently high. And that seemed to be beyond what United would consider, likely exceeding €150 million. The other striker consistently linked with the move to Old Trafford was Harry Kane, who eventually moved to Bayern Munich for just over €100 million, which could rise to €110 million with bonuses. Now, it may be true that Tottenham didn't want to do business with a club in the Premier League, and so may well have demanded more from Man United than the fee they accepted from Bayern, but the contrast could hardly be more stark. They spent €72 million for a player In the first phase of his career, with only 18 league goals to date, half of those coming in the Austrian league, and Kane, England's record goal scorer with 213 Premier League goals, who left for only 30 million more. Now, it's possible, of course, that Kane himself didn't want to move to Man United, although given how close he was to Shearer's Premier League record, it seems unlikely that he would have chosen to move to Germany instead of United. So it would seem that far from getting his first choice striker, Ten Hag got a player whom United might have overpaid for even in today's inflated transfer market. Now, that's not the only time United had to settle following the injury to Luke Shaw just before the transfer window. United seemed set to sign Benjamin Pavard from Bayern and Marc Cucurella from Chelsea. But the club's failure to move on players, particularly McTominay and Maguire, meant that they instead signed Reguilon from Spurs on a season-long loan, as well as a free transfer of 35-year-old Johnny Evans, a free agent after having been relegated with Leicester, playing only 13 times. Perhaps more revealing of United's inability to attract Ten Hag's first choice was the fact that Liverpool were able to sign Ryan Gravenberch, an Ajax Academy player who, having won the Abdelak Nouri Trophy, which is awarded to the brightest player in the Ajax Academy, whose previous winners list reads like a who's who of world football. In the end, Liverpool were able to sign him for 40 million euros. But even that's not the whole story, since United had tried the season before to sign him, but he chose instead to go to Bayern for 18 million. Now, his time at Bayern wasn't a success, so perhaps Ten Hag had decided against bringing the player who he'd relied on so much at Ajax. But surely it's more likely that the player chose Klopp's Liverpool over a United managed by the man who gave him his debut as the youngest Ajax player at 16 years and 130 days. At the very end of the window, United were able to complete the signing of 27-year-old midfielder Sofiane Amrabat from Fiorentina, a player who'd enjoyed an excellent World Cup for Morocco and looked like the perfect player to play alongside Casemiro. Whilst this does seem to have been good business for United, he wasn't available for the first 4 games of the season due to how late the transfer was concluded, and was only actually signed on loan due to restrictions on United spending under FFP regulations. That's not the whole story either though, since it would have been possible for the Glazers to invest up to 90 million euros of their own money to allow for more transfers, and they chose not to. There is just not the space in this video to cover all of the issues we need to around the ownership of United and their on-off sale of the club. The issue that they're unwilling to invest, or is it a sign that they don't feel 100% confident in Ten Hag? Perhaps the latter is a leap too far. After all, they have spent over 400 million on players. But there's no doubting that they haven't moved on all of the players that he wanted them to. Maguire, McTominay and Van der Beek are all still in the squad at the time of writing and seem happy to stay despite it being clear they don't feature at all in Ten Hag's plans. And that's going to have an effect on the morale of the squad. Which brings us to the next key issue, which is likely to have a bearing on Ten Hag's position, and that's squad harmony and player development as well as man management. Clearly, when he took over, there were a large number of players who were deemed surplus to requirements or a risk to squad harmony. Players that Ten Hag didn't feel he could work with, and these were moved on. But since that first wave of players to leave, there have been more that he didn't feel he could work with this season. We saw the departure of Fred, De Gea, Elanga and Telles, and as already discussed, it seems only an inability to find clubs for Maguire, Van der Beek and McTominay that has kept them at United. There's little chance of these players being called on unless there is a serious injury crisis. That said, Maguire did get game time against Arsenal, owing to both Martinez and Lindelof having to go off, adding to the already injured Shaw and Varane. It surely calls into question his coaching ability that he doesn't feel that he can get them to contribute. A question that's far more pressing when it comes to the current situation around Jadon Sancho, who didn't make the squad for the game at the Emirates. When asked why after the defeat, Ten Hag was brutally honest and said that Sancho had not been reaching the required levels in training. It was an assertion that was strongly denied by the player on his Instagram in a statement that claimed he was being scapegoated by the manager. This is highly unusual as a situation, not least because Sancho was such a marquee signing for Solskjaer, arriving from Dortmund to great fanfare for 75 million euros. Now, it's fair to say that his time at Old Trafford hasn't lived up to his potential. Once seen as one of the brightest players in the England setup, he failed to make the squad for the World Cup. And last season, in an effort to rehabilitate him, Ten Hag actually allowed him to take a 3-month sabbatical, which is a really unusual step for a big club to take, but a sign that he was prepared to handle the player with kid gloves. That approach seems to be one he no longer deems to be the right choice, given his public criticism of the player. It seems that United are now prepared to sell or loan Sancho, but the timing of this falling out has left little chance of that before the next transfer window opens. At the start of the season, without signing wingers, it seemed fair to say that more would be required from Sancho and Antony if United were to improve as an attacking threat. But with the decision to allow Antony to take time off following allegations made against the player, I'm not going to go into any of those because I truly believe that everyone has the right to be considered innocent until proven guilty. But clearly, without him available or now Sancho, it seems that United are short of the personnel they need to fully apply the manager's preferred tactical approach. It's hard not to feel that Ten Hag has some responsibility, even if you can't blame him for the Antony situation. And he is a player that he brought in for a lot of money, who was largely disappointing in his first season and really need to impress this. Then you do have to wonder at how effective he's been at improving players in the squad. He was able to improve Rashford last season, but even there he's been unable to convince him to play up front when needed. His performances as a striker were poor, and it's only by moving him back to his favoured position on the left that Rashford seems to be playing anywhere near his potential. Obviously it's still too early to judge Mason Mount, but he has been a little bit underwhelming, and there's every chance he's going to have to play off the right now so that they can also fit Amrabat into the team alongside Casemiro, where he's going to be at his best. Casemiro, after all, has looked hopelessly isolated in the first 4 games. Ten Hag has a reputation as a strict disciplinarian, and that can be a risk with a team that's not fully behind the manager. Are we seeing the early signs of squad disharmony, or is there an issue around the players not quite understanding the tactics? That's another area that can lead to a manager's dismissal: tactics and style of play. United fans longed for a return to the side which dominated the domestic game and had success in Europe at the highest level. Attacking football that saw them overwhelm even the best teams in the world. Ten Hag is known to be a disciple of possession-based football, happy to hold on to the ball at the back until a space opens up and then transitioning the ball quickly into attack. The goal which saw them take the lead against Arsenal was almost a perfect example, winning possession in their own third and releasing Rashford with a delightful through ball which saw him finish superbly. But that's not the whole picture. The ball wasn't won back thanks to pressing, but instead a result of a carelessly sloppy pass from Havertz. This was almost the first time United had played a pass into the opposition half. For the game against Wolves at home, which only a highly questionable VAR decision not to award the penalty saw them win, there seemed no cohesion at all in the midfield, with huge spaces for opposition players to exploit. And the same was true in both the come-from-behind victory over Forest, where defensive frailty had seen them go 2-0 down in the first 20 minutes, and the abject away defeat to Tottenham, where again they were entirely overrun in the midfield. So far this season, either the players don't fully understand what they're being asked to do, or they don't have the required skills to enact that strategy. Either way, the fault of this has to lie with the manager. Ten Hag, though, has said that he's happy with the way the team has been playing. He may be the only person who is. He put the defeat at Arsenal down to poor refereeing and said that the team had played really well. In truth, it was a performance not dissimilar from the approach taken by Forest when they visited the Emirates. Man United must seek to impose themselves more on games if they're to have any chance of improving on last season. So what can we expect from United? Ten Hag has said he'd like to make them the fastest transitioning team in Europe, and that was of course before he lost Antony and Sancho. The next game sees the visit of Brighton, who've been in great form at the start of the season, playing the kind of football that United fans wish they could see their team playing. Hardly an ideal opponent with all that's happening right now. Winning that game could certainly boost the mood amongst the fans, as could Amrabat's return from injury and starting his career positively. After Brighton, Man United have a run of games that should see them take maximum points, but then they face City, a team they have surely never been further from matching. What if that result is a humiliation, and they fail to take maximum points from Burnley, Palace, Brentford and Sheffield United? How clamorous will be the call for change from fans who must feel they're cursed? Worse still, they face Bayern away in the Champions League. What if that game exposes them further? Of course, the worst case scenario would be a defeat in the League Cup, which would mean their entire season is likely to be about the FA Cup. It may only be Ten Hag's second season in charge, but if they don't improve quickly, they're in danger of playing out a season which may see them struggle to make it into the top 4 behind City, Arsenal, Liverpool, Spurs, Brighton, even Villa. Now my prediction is that by the halfway point of the season, without improvement, they're going to be 16 points off the leaders and 4 points off the top 4. but it could be far worse. Ten Hag seems determined to blame everything but himself for the current mess, and certainly much is beyond his control. But a manager's job is to create a vision and sell that vision to the players so that they perform over what they're usually capable of. I think this is beyond him. I feel that he feels let down by transfers, unsupported by players, and he's becoming increasingly paranoid. Perhaps with a better infrastructure around him, he might have had a better chance, but if United had that, he wouldn't be the manager. This squad does not seem to be improving, and United have never been less able to attract top players. His tactics seem too defensive and uninspiring for the history of the club, and he seems to have created as many problems in squad harmony as he's fixed. I predict this will be a hugely challenging season for him and United, and in all likelihood, it'll be his last.